This podcast is sponsored by Community Bridges Incorporated. CBI is a premier nonprofit, fully integrated healthcare provider of substance abuse and behavioral health programs right here in Arizona. They offer prevention, education, and treatment services using cutting-edge, nationally recognized, evidence-based models. CBI believes in maintaining the dignity of human life and knows recovery is possible. This staff of over 1,600 employees celebrate, believe, and inspire others daily, as over 75% of the team members are in recovery themselves. Contact CBI at scheduling@cbridges.com or visit their website, communitybridgesaz.org.
Hey everyone, it's Brandon Lee, host of the podcast Escaping Rock Bottom. I'm really excited to have this guest on the podcast today. Her life got really dark. I mean, really dark. She got into a lot of trouble. But we get to see what her life looks like today. Her story is inspiring. As a matter of fact, when she shared her story with me, I got goosebumps listening to parts of her story because we actually share a lot of commonalities in the way we were raised, how dark life got for both of us, and where her life is now. So I want to bring Tanya into the podcast and the conversation today. Tanya, thank you so much for being so willing and brave enough to share your story.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm humbled.
Yeah. So take me back to your childhood. Where were you born and raised?
Well, I'm originally from Los Angeles, and I grew up with my brother and my sister. I had an older sister that my mom sent to live with her dad when she was about 3 or 4 years old. My mom struggled with addiction. It's actually addiction has haunted our family, even going back to my grandmother and my mom's siblings as well. So it was very prevalent in our life.
So when you were a child growing up in that environment, did you see drug use? Did you see a lot of people drinking?
My mom had people over the house all the time. People came in and out, and there were times where my brother's 5 years younger, so for the first 5 years it was just my sister and myself were twins, fraternal twins, and we used to hide like behind the couches, like in the fireplace, and because men could not keep their hands off of us. And there were times where things happened, and my mom was really high or really drunk, and didn't know that there were actually just things going on, there in front of her. Men were just really sneaky, and we were homeless a lot. We slept in our vehicle. My mom was in jail a lot, and then there were times where she would take off, and she wouldn't come home for days, and
that's a lot of trauma.
It is.
That's a lot of trauma, Tanya. I have been very open. It took me until I was age 37, and I'm 40, so it wasn't long ago, that I was first able to tell people that I was molested as a child by my youth soccer coach and by my piano teacher. I mean, these were authority figures who were allowed access inside of my home. And those were the people who molested me repeatedly. And that did a lot of damage to me. It's one of the reasons why at age 15 I became a sex addict, because I was sexualized at such a young age that at age 15, I sought out that pleasure. I sought out sex as a way to cope, as an outlet, because I was sexualized so early on in life.
Well, we watched my mom, even doing drugs like in front of us and stuff. And there were times where people OD'd, and we watched them, my mom bring them back. There were times when my mom OD'd and we had to help bring her back. There were times where I had to hold her arm so she can put the needle in her arm. And I was like 7 years old, 8 years old. So my brother, my sister and I were exposed to a lot. I, for some reason, was my mom's target. I looked like my dad. And so when my mom was angry or she needed somebody to take things out on, I was the one that she came after. And my teachers loved me, and and when I went to school, and other people's parents, but the one that I wanted was her. And I just couldn't get that from her. So we spent a lot of our years, like I said, homeless. I remember one time when she went to jail and they took us to a foster care, and I can't imagine how a police officer felt when he took us to leave us there. We were holding on. We locked our arms, my sister and I, around his legs, and we were screaming for him not to let us, not to leave us there. And any other place, we already knew what my mom was like at a young age being there. It was kind of like everybody was, going through it. And it just led into into my teenage years. It was just constant drug use. I know that my mom tried to get out of the drug use. She went to like Victory Outreach Women's Homes and, but she had a lot of her own trauma and she had a lot of her own sadness that just kept her coming back. It just kept pulling back. And I have to say that while all of these things happened with my mom, there was a question of the kind of mother that my mom was, because there were times where she knew what had happened and she made excuses for it, honestly, and now understanding addiction, I can forgive her because I understand where she was at the time. And I think it's very easy for people to forget that there's a person inside that addiction. It's not just the addict. There's a person dying to overcome that addiction and to get out.
Wow. Let's unpack some of that, because that's some pretty powerful stuff. I was scared of my mom. I believe my mom is bipolar. I didn't know what mom was going to come home that day. I feared her. And I was abused. I was abused as well. And my mom also knew of the sex abuse that was going on, because apparently I told her as a child. Mm-hmm. But my mom also suffered trauma as a child. Right. And she will never tell me what happened to her, but I've heard anecdotal stories from people who knew my mom as a child and what had happened to her. That was untreated trauma. She has never faced that. She's never healed from that. And so what happened is that was passed on to me, mm-hmm. To the child. And you have forgiven your mom. And that is incredible, because I just forgave my mom over this last summer, wow. When I finally said, I forgive you and I love you unconditionally. You will always be my mom. I will always be your son. I don't know if we'll ever have a relationship again, but I forgive you. I forgive you. She didn't accept that apology, by the way. She didn't even accept that, because she's still stuck in that mental state of mind. Mm-hmm. But that is really powerful that you were able to forgive the mom after the way you were raised and the life that she put you through. So we'll kind of circle back to that later down in life, because I want to know, where did life for you, growing up in that environment, Tanya, where did life start to go off the rails for you? When did you start to rebel? Because forgiveness comes later on in life. Right. So in that time, when did you start to rebel?
Well, when I was in 8th grade, we were still living, the same lifestyle as when we were kids. And I started hanging around a gang, over there in Northeast Los Angeles. And we were able to connect because of our home experiences. And my sister was home with me, and at that time my brother was home. My mom, we all went through the abuse that my mom, with my mom, but for me, because I think I was her target, I chose to connect with kids outside, and that's how I joined the gang. And by the time I hit 9th grade, I dropped out of school and I went to the streets, and I remember telling my mom that before I left that, that I was from a gang, and she didn't have high expectations for me. She just said, well, you'll probably be pregnant next. For my sister, she had these high expectations, business suit, Wall Street, businesswoman. But for me, there was just no expectations.
Do you think that was because you reminded her of the father?
Absolutely. The message that my mom had given to me was that I was a mistake and that I was somebody she didn't want around. I was a reminder of pain from her past. And so
getting that rejection from the one person who's supposed to love you mm-hmm. and nurture you the most is really traumatic.
Yes.
You said something really poignant again about people who are in gangs. And I think from an outsider's point of view, what's the immediate reaction when we think of somebody in a gang? You're trouble, you're mean, you're a killer, you're there to harm people. Yeah, I mean, gang members do some really awful, awful things. They terrorize other people. Peel back that layer, right? Peel back that layer.
That's right.
And all of a sudden, when you start to look at why is somebody in a gang,
That's right.
and you just said, because you all found a commonality, you were able to relate toward one another because in some ways you were abandoned or abused in your upbringing.
Absolutely. And, you know, they did have this during that time. It was the LA war on drugs, war on gangs. And I remember just being like 15 years old and us watching the TV, and they said that they were going to war. And one of the guys from my neighborhood said, we got to go to war with them too, because we were at war with other gangs, you know. And a lot of hopes and dreams and love and light died on those streets, and they do every day with kids and gangs, you know. And I think being from my neighborhood saved me because you know, being from a gang, you have to be tough. And when I first went in, I was crying because I wasn't at home anymore. And the reason why I had finally left is because my mom was getting high with the guy in the bathroom, and he came out and sat next to me on the couch, and he started rubbing his hands on my legs, and I told him off. You know, I was big enough. I couldn't wait till I was old enough to say, you know, like, F you, leave me alone. You're not going to put your hands on me anymore. And my mom came out and she was like, you know, don't talk to my friends like that. You're a whore, you know, whatever. And so I decided that I was going to go. And I remember my sister and my brother, you know, walking me down and me saying that I was going to come back in a week. And I never came back. And my twin sister followed me wherever I went. In my neighborhood, she went to look for me as a teenager when I got busted and went to juvenile hall. Like, she's been my steady. My sister Natalie, through this, you know, through the whole, you know, through this whole ordeal, always believed in me and just was there. And she's the only one really that walked with me through that darkness.
You know, what is also traumatic, and I'm sure has impacted you in your, you know, interpersonal relationships, is that in that moment where that man violated you mm-hmm. on that couch, and your mom came out, she stood with the abuser.
Yes.
She stood with the abuser and not her own child, the mm-hmm. abused. That in and of itself can send somebody spiraling down the darkest ways. It's one of the reasons why I ended up 2 years sober in an abusive relationship. I chose somebody who would abuse me. When our parents stand with the abuser, that oftentimes will lead us to be an abuser.
That's right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Until we stand against that behavior, we will become that behavior. Because we're seeing the one person who's supposed to stand and love and care for us. Right. Wait, my mom is standing with the abuser, essentially telling me what he is doing is okay. Right. Even though we know it's not okay.
Right.
So how your life gets even more dark.
It does. So I'm out there on the streets, you know, and there's, you know, a lot of gang violence. We had gang fights. I was raped because at 15, I was already an addict. I was doing meth. PCP was something that took me out of this world. And I was, you know, sexual trauma was a huge part of my first 22 years. I also allowed myself to be taken advantage of, you know, by guys because number one, I felt like maybe if I give this to him, then I was looking for love, you know, then he would,
because
maybe he'll stay.
You saw that.
Yes.
You saw that behavior from your mom.
Yes.
And that's how she used her body.
Yes.
In order to feel love.
Yes.
Right? That's untreated trauma. Your mom was violated, I'm sure, at some point in her life, mm-hmm. never healed from that and became that.
Yes, absolutely. And I learned through my education that our parents are the very first model. They set the model relationship that we're going to have. They're our first relationship. And what do you do when that foundation, especially the first 5 years, what do you do when that foundation is broken? You know, what do you expect for somebody who comes into this world broken? Because it was dark when we came in, not just for me, but for my siblings as well. It was dark. And all 5 of us have different different trauma and experiences that we're still recovering from, because recovery is a lifelong process. It has to become a lifestyle, but it was when I remember, talking crap about my mom and calling her all kinds of names and seeing her with her black eyes, and getting beat up and taken advantage of when she was passed out. And there was a lot of sex going on in our house with adults, and it was just ugly. It was gross, dark, and ugly. And I remember saying, I'll never do that, and I'll never let a guy hit me, and I'll never do this. And it's a learned behavior. It's a repeated pattern. And I don't think people get the just that it is an everyday, for kids that grow up like that. From the moment you wake up, we used to get pulled out of bed at 2 a.m. by our hair and thrown around looking for her purse because it had her heroin in it. Or, you know what I'm saying? So we just, and then you go out in the streets and you have these kids that have, there were kids out there that had good parents. And I used to have a problem with them because their parents would come looking for them and stuff. Nobody came, my parents, the only one that came was my sister looking for me in the streets. Nobody came. My mom never came looking for me. And, and when I tried to go back, then she said, I don't want you to go back. And when I tried to visit my little brother at school, she said, if you go near my kids, then I'll kill you. She didn't even want me around my sister and my brother. She didn't want, you want to stay out there? Go out there. And then reported me, that I was a runaway, and in certain moments throughout my life, there was people who came in, I have to say that shed a little bit of light in that darkness, because that's how my story, that's how I get to where where I am, which we'll talk about after. But on the streets, I was hoping that I would get shot. I was hoping I would get stabbed. I was hoping that I would die, because in my neighborhood, I was somebody. They made me feel like somebody. I was nobody to the world. And to them, I was. People knew my name, and I was proud of that. And all those kids, because we're talking about kids, all those kids out there are nobody too, because society looked at us like we're terrorists. We're domestic terrorists. As a matter of fact, they, called us. So there's, and you're told like, this is your life. And that's how I thought it sometimes. This is my life. And I knew in my dreams what I wanted my life to be, but it seemed far. Like, this is what it is. And I'm going to live it out as best I can. I didn't make plans to be anything because I didn't know if I was going to even make it to 18, so we didn't have plans for our futures. We just tried to survive together, on the streets, sleeping on top of apartment buildings, and stealing food from the markets so that we could have something to eat, and I think that's what saved me.
Thank you for sharing that, because I want people to know that, like, when you see a drug addict who's really strung out, they didn't want their life to be that way. And I know that that's the first place a lot of people who haven't lived through our experience, they go to is, oh, what a mess. Oh, what a mess. Rather than the empathetic side saying, okay, just peel back one more layer before you judge them.
Right.
And look at what their life was. I guarantee you they suffered a lot of trauma. I guarantee you they suffered a lot of abuse. They just didn't have access to the mental health care out there, nor therapists. They haven't worked through that trauma because those resources were never given to them.
Right.
So I look at gang members and I'm like, dude, you should be held absolutely accountable for your actions. But I also know that you were traumatized, and that's what left you there. Nobody wakes up one day and says, I think I'm going to go out and be a killer today. I think I'm going to go out and terrorize a bunch of people today. No, It's a set of life circumstances that they lived through that led them to that life. Absolutely.
And we dehumanize people when we label them. When I label you an addict, or I label you a gang member, I label you, a tweaker or a crackhead, or, you know what I'm saying?
It's
like
damaging.
Yes, you dehumanize a person. You separate the human from the real issue. The person is not the problem. It's what has happened to them and why they do what they do is the problem.
So take me to your rock bottom. What did that look like for you when Tanya finally looked at herself and said, I can't do this anymore. I want to change?
Well, when I was 18, I had my first son, and his dad got shot and he died. I was 5.5 months pregnant. And when I had him, I would stay at different places, like in the neighborhood and on the streets and stuff. But when I had him, I didn't want to take him to my neighborhood. I was scared. So I was homeless when I had my first son. And my sister had a friend in high school that she asked if I could go, home with them to go stay with them. And I didn't even know who they were. And I struggled with even just separating, being a gang member, with the kids, with my son, and then being an addict as well. And then 2 years later, I had another son, and I was still an addict. I was still in my neighborhood, and my sister had asked me for my sons, and I said, no, if you take them, I'll die, because I was just using. I had attempted suicide, quite a few times. And I think, the kids were a reason why I need to be here. And I was angry with God because out of all the women in the world, he gave them to me. And by the time I was 30, I was still in my neighborhood, still an addict, homeless, sleeping at motels. And there was a couple of times where just when I had my first two sons that we were sleeping in the park, and I had my jacket over them because we had nowhere to go. And despite all of that, I could not find, I was in so much pain and felt drowned by it. I could not find a way out to let that addiction go. It was my safety, and I have a cousin who moved out to Arizona. We call her Mouse. And she had, in 2003, she had asked us to come out for Thanksgiving. And so we drove, my sister and I, with all the kids. I was using, I fought with my sister. Fist fought and beat her up because I was coming down and I was angry. And then we went back to California in 2004. I talked to my cousin again, and she's like, how you doing? And I said, I'm not doing good. And I knew at that time I was dying. I had 4 kids, and I was at the end of my rope, and that lifestyle, because I had the kids, I couldn't just go and hustle and stuff. I was using, then I was, they say don't get high off your own supply, but I was getting high off of my own supply, and I had no, I just had come to the end. And I told my sister, let's go, let's get out of here. And she was like, no, I don't want to go to that little town. It was a little town with 1,200 people, young Arizona, and cowboys, cowgirls, animals, everything that LA is not. And so she ended up coming up, and I talked to her in January, and she's like, I got you a ticket, Mouse is out here, let's come here with the kids. And I didn't want it. I was scared. I knew nothing except that life, and I was still trying to struggle and hustle and make it. And I couldn't postpone my ticket anymore. And on March 5th of 2005 at 1 a.m, I jumped on a Greyhound with 4 of my kids and headed to Arizona. And as I was leaving the streets of Los Angeles, all these memories of who I am and what I know is coming to an end. And then you have all these streets that are unfamiliar, and I'm going to the unknown. And I didn't know how to be anything in this world but what I was, a gang member, an addict, and a mom.
So how did you turn your life around?
What's great about my messages is I feel that I'm not the hero in my story. The hero are the people who reached into my life. I moved to this little town, and I wanted to go back, and my cousin said, look, she said, if you're going to go back, that's fine, but don't go unless you give it 100%. And I'm like, what the heck am I going to do in this little town? You know what I'm saying? I didn't even know where to get a job, and the lady at the welfare office told me that they weren't going to hire the homegirl from LA, that they would hire the local yoke. So I just came over here to be on welfare, and my sister jumped all over her back, and the town just really got together and embraced me. At first they were scared when I got there. It was a lady, Jan, who believed in me. She hired me to be a waitress at the restaurant, and she said I'd be making $4 an hour. And she's like, and that's great. And I thought in my head, are you freaking kidding me? $4 an hour. I was making a lot when I was slinging, And so she gave me a chance, and the owners there gave me a chance, and the town gave me a chance. I went with an empty cup, and I was just beat up, and I was done. And it was either committed to dying or committed to changing and living. And it was those people who knew nothing about where I came from, a gang member in Los Angeles, who showed me grace and who filled my cup and saw things in me that I couldn't see in myself, and I was able to get sober. I even found drugs there, and I didn't know I was pregnant with my 5th kid, which was horrifying and scary, but so I call my youngest son the stowaway. But, it was a blessing, because together with that town and everything they taught me about how to be, I had to set all my stuff aside and really try to be a mom to my kids.
I want to take you and fast forward to where your life is now, because you work in recovery.
I do.
You work in the treatment industry, and I think that's one of the most beautiful things about our lifestyle, our lifestyle of recovery, as you say, because it really is a lifestyle, that it is the one industry that really embraces people with our troubled past.
Yes.
It's because they judge us by what our lives look like today, right now, because you have something so beautiful to offer. That hopeless person who's been cast aside, that person who's been abused, that person who's been molested as a child, that you, Tanya, can look at them in their most hopeless state and you can say, I get you. I understand your pain.
Absolutely.
What's it like working at Community Bridges? It's a treatment center and a real philosophy that they don't care if you don't have insurance. They don't care how much money you make. They don't care. They will love you, accept you, and help you get better and give you the tools and the resources. What's it like working at a treatment facility like CBI?
I've been working for CBI for 4 years. When I first started, I worked at Center for Hope. A lot of magic happens there. It's women who are experiencing homelessness, addiction, and who are pregnant. I spent 2 years there and watched women come in the doors broken, and then leave with their head held high with their children onto a life that, a promising future. I could relate to that because I was a mom in who struggled with addiction, and I've been in recovery for 14 years. And so, Community Bridges has allowed me, now I'm the PATH program supervisor of our outreach team, and our team outreach is Maricopa County, and we get to go and treat people like they're human, which is really important to Community Bridges, is the community. And Community Bridges expects the best from their workers, from their staff. They want us to be at our game. And the number one thing that I like about Community Bridges is that they hire people with pasts like mine to show people who are in that position that there is hope, that there is a possibility, for you to recover, and that you're not going to do it by yourself, that we're going to do it with you. And they have the open door policy. You're right. If they don't have insurance, no matter where they come from, what their name is, or, the ethnicity, nothing matters except we want to work with you on getting yourself back together. We have detox centers. We have the women in recovery. We have our outreach programs. We have our mental health clinics, that serve people with a serious mental illness. So I didn't really learn how huge Community Bridges was until I got into the PATH team. And I'm, coming from a neighborhood and stuff, I always say, like, CBI is rolling deep because we are all over the place. And I love to drive around and see CBI cars and see people out of their cars reaching out to the community. And it allows me to share light and the message of hope, just like other people shared with me. And that is why I decided to get into doing what I was doing. And I've worked for other agencies, and I found that Community Bridges is my home. This is where I'm going to retire. This is where I'm going to be, because they want you to be who you are in recovery, that your story matters, your message matters, and going out in the community and giving hope matters.
That's so beautiful when you find your life purpose in something like that. And I always tell people I'm so grateful to be able to wake up and make a living over something I am so passionate about.
Absolutely.
But also have the support of my company.
Yes.
And I have to stress that point, because your bosses support you in your lifestyle.
Absolutely, 1,000%. Yes.
My bosses support my lifestyle of recovery as well, to the point where they allow me to have this podcast. They allow me to speak openly and so publicly about my own trauma, my own addictions, and how I was able to overcome that, because my bosses, we're Arizona's family, right? Your Community Bridges, we're Arizona's family. Well, guess what? Addiction and mental health touches every family in Arizona.
That's right.
So why hide that?
Right.
Why run from that? Why hide from that? Why not embrace it and show that Brandon's part of Arizona's family at 3TV and CBS 5, and we understand and we love and embrace him, because what he stands for now is essentially telling all Arizona families, we get you. We're not going to judge
Absolutely.
you. We get you and we see you, because addiction touches every facet of everybody's lives. It just does.
That's right.
Whether you're rich, whether you're poor, whether you're homeless, or you live in a multi-million-dollar home in Paradise Valley, addiction does not discriminate. And it's really beautiful. There's another rewarding thing. There are days where I wake up and I get an email from somebody who just discovered my book, or I get a sponsee who hits that 1 year mark. And to see the joy on their faces, to see my sponsee repair the relationship with his own mom or dad
Yes.
that he destroyed or she destroyed, to see them rebuild their lives, to see them get their first job, to see them get their first apartment, to see them say, hey, Brandon, I finally got my own car. To see, I get goosebumps thinking about those stories. To see somebody else when they're first so hopeless, to see them do the work and to see them build a life anew is the most rewarding thing that can ever happen in my life. And I can only imagine in your line of work that you feel the same and you get to see and experience the same.
Oh, absolutely. And there are clients who don't forget to come back and say, hey, look at what I've done. And the one thing that I love about our leadership meetings is even if it's one success story, we celebrate, and we have our clients and their successes. And, I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, that just reminded me when you said when they come back and they show you what their lives are like now. It was when I was 5 years sober, and I did it again when I hit my 10-year mark. I went back to Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital in Los Angeles. And that was at 5 years, I wanted to go back to the nurses and the doctors who saved me twice in 2 weeks in a coma when I was on life support in LA. And I went to the hospital, Hollywood Presbyterian, with my 5-year chip, and I just wanted to give it to them. Mm-hmm. Security guard is like, yo, man, you can't go back to the ER.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay. And he saw, and I got, I just kind of put my head down and I said, well, can you just do me this favor? Can you give this card and this chip to the doctors down in the hallway in the ER? I said, they saved my life 5 years ago on life support twice. And I just wanted to show them what I've done with my life now. The security guard gets teary-eyed. He goes, "Oh hell no! No! I'm not walking this back there. I'm going to walk you back there." He goes,
Yes.
"Let me escort you back there." So he escorts me back to the ER. He pulls the ER doctor, the lead doctor on the floor that day, pulls her aside and says, "This gentleman has something to say." Now, mind you, this is a packed ER in Los Angeles. It's crazy going on. So this ER doctor looks at me and goes, "Who are you? What do you want?" And I just said, "Listen," I said, "I know you're busy." I said, 5 years ago, on this day, I was on life support, and your team of doctors saved my life, not just once, but they did it twice. And I said, I just celebrated 5 years today, and I just wanted to say thank you. Lead doctor, just suddenly with ice in their veins, just melted, started crying. She calls the entire, she whistles, says, everybody come over. And I stood there and I was just crying. And I saw the nurse who showed me compassion. And she's the one who gave me the $10 to go to her church that night. And that was the first 12-step meeting I ever went to. And so to go back, and you know what the doctor says as she was walking me out to the parking lot? She goes, nobody ever comes back.
Wow.
Nobody ever comes back. She goes, but you know what you just did to my team in there?
Yes.
You just gave them the biggest shot in the arm.
Yes.
To motivate them. I always can cry when I think about this story. She goes, you just motivated them to continue doing the work that they do and continue saving other people. And that's what this is about.
It is.
It's about that. It's about this team of doctors who did not give up on me when I was dying, who kept me alive. And because of them, I'm able to live this life and do what I do now.
Right. That's why I love Community Bridges. I was going to say the 90-10 model. I feel personally that it's our responsibility, we're humans, to carry the burdens for one another and to help each other and to be there for each other and to show grace. We as humans should look after humans and come to their aid when they're in need. And with Community Bridges, we have the 90-10 model, which is my favorite. And I had first heard it when I started doing the AIT. And it's, I will carry 90% for you, and you can carry 10. And then when you're strong enough, you can carry 20 and I'll carry 80. And we begin to work with our clients so that they can carry their weight and that they can, change their lives. They are the heroes, for us, and we celebrate them and then those are the ones that come back and they remember everybody. Our leadership gets out there outreaching, you know what I'm saying? Like on the streets, like nobody's afraid to get in the trenches. Nobody's afraid to get dirty and get close to these people because they are our people. And I always say that our outreach teams, it's our duty to make the invisible visible again because they are suffering in silence out there. And society is just going by. And my favorite thing about Community Bridges is that it allows me and my team to go out there and to bring a dose of human kindness or services, or help to people who are out there that can't reach out and get it for themselves.
It's a beautiful message. I know so many of our viewers and listeners are going to want to just know an update. Do you have a relationship with your mom?
When I was 24 years old, my mom passed away from cancer.
I'm sorry.
I did get an apology from her. And I have to say that she was like a light and people were like moths. They flocked to her, but they absorbed everything from her. She was, apart from her addiction, she was a wonderful person, but in her addiction, she was not. But she did say that she was sorry. A lot of the damage was done. I think she was just looking like, here, I'm leaving, and this is how I'm leaving my daughter, which is important for us to reach into each other's lives and to be there for one another.
Well, I'm sorry, but I'm glad that you were able to have some closure with that.
Yes,
and
thank you.
she was able to say she was sorry.
Yes.
Because that's important for your healing.
Absolutely.
Important for your healing. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.
It's an incredible story. Keep going out there
Thank
doing your work and inspiring others and helping people.
I will.
Helping people. God, that turned into a cry fest, and I wasn't even expecting that. So listen, if you're out there right now and you're struggling, or perhaps you know somebody who's struggling and you don't have insurance, or maybe you don't have a ton of money, or maybe you just don't have any hope, pick up the phone, call Community Bridges, talk to one of their people on intake. They'll guide you, and they'll get you on the right path and what's needed for you to find that hope in your life. Because no matter how dark it is, look at Tanya's story, and you just heard it, and see where her life is today. That could be you. So thank you for tuning in to another episode of Escaping Rock Bottom. We'll see you back here for the next episode.
This podcast is sponsored by Community Bridges Incorporated. CBI is a premier nonprofit, fully integrated healthcare provider of substance abuse and behavioral health programs right here in Arizona. They offer prevention, education, and treatment services using cutting-edge, nationally recognized, evidence-based models. CBI believes in maintaining the dignity of human life and knows recovery is possible. The staff of over 1,600 employees celebrate, believe, and inspire others daily, as over 75% of the team members are in recovery themselves. Contact CBI at scheduling@cbridges.com or visit their website, communitybridgesaz.org.